There are literal monsters littered throughout all of the Playtime Co. factory, but where did they all come from? Or rather, how were they made? Well, that's what I'm going to be going over in this video, where I'm going to try to figure out the process of how the experiments were taken from human to toy. The first thing I want to look at is the Chapter 4 trailer called The Doctor, where we see Harley Sawyer waking up in what seemed to be his new body. However, we know that this was just one of his Sarly Hoyers, or maybe even a scrapped concept. But during one of the camera glitches, we see text saying "My Creations," as well as screenshots of the bigger body's toys, where some of them seem to be in surgery. And we know that Harley operated on the experiments himself, as in the notes that we find in the Chapter 3 ARG, we read of a proposal of Experiment 1188, or otherwise known as Catnap, where they give a list of several different children, one of which being Theodore Grambell, who was the one who ended up being chosen. But also in the letter, it says that Sawyer insisted that he would be the one to operate on Catnap. But what actually happened during these operations, and how would you take a person's conscience and put it into another body? Well, this is where it starts to get hard to theorize on, because very little is known about what would actually happen during the experiments. But my friend, do you know what video you are watching right now? You are watching a puppetry video, and all we do is yap here. So with that said, Poppy tells us in a Chapter 4 tape that she was being operated on over and over and over again, where the Playtime co-scientist would take certain parts of her out and put them back in, almost as if they were trying to rework her or figure out how she even worked in the first place, as Poppy seems to be the very first experiment.
Did the bad men hurt you? There's nothing more they can do to hurt me. It's been weeks and weeks of taking things out and putting them back in, and taking things out and putting them back in. Over and over and over. Nothing's ever gotten better, and it'll never get better.
Although Poppy seemed to have been conscious during her surgeries, it's possible that with the addition of the red smoke into Playcare, they could have used this as a way to keep their experiments unconscious during transfer. And because Sawyer was a neuroscientist, we can actually figure out a bit more as to how these toys work. They're not just brand new bodies, but rather toys with the brain of a human. And I can show this in two different ways. The first is that it would be incredibly hard to make a brand new brain, and so it would make sense to use what you already have and just transfer the person's brain into a toy, which is why they would have Harley Sawyer be the one to operate on the experiments. And the second is that in a note written by Riley, she tells us that she can no longer separate her fingers or feel her hair, even though everything in her body is telling her the opposite, which shows that her human brain is still there, trying to get used to her new body. But it took a while for Playtime Co. to get to this point, as Experiment 1160, or otherwise known as Boxy Boo, was their first real success. But even then, he was pretty much brainless and acted more like an animal than a human. It took them another 10 experiments till they could finally have one with sufficient intelligence, which led to the creation of Huggy Wuggy. And with Huggy being the ideal candidate, possessing both sufficient intelligence and maximum obedience, Playtime Co. kept going up from there, creating experiments such as Mommy Longlegs, Catnap, and even Doey, who was made up of 3 different children in the same body. But even though they had many successes, there was one problem that kept occurring post-surgery, and that's what was known as the adjustment period. A period of time where after the toy was created, the mind still had to get used to its new body, which led to irregulations in behavior and even extreme episodes of violence. When Catnap managed to escape his containment, he killed several of the Playtime Co. staff. But after the adjustment period, he was around the orphans and doing exactly what was expected of him. And Playtime Co. eventually came to know this fact artifact very well, as they used it against Jack Ayer's parents and had Doey killed them. Just days after Doey woke up, one of the scientists allowed his parents to walk into the room completely unprotected and locked the door right behind them, which led to Doey becoming aggressive and killing them in just minutes.
Can we talk to him?
Yes, ma'am, you certainly can. Go on in, whenever you're ready.
No, I don't want to talk! Get out!
Susan, I think we should leave.
Jackie, I'm staying right here. Mommy won't hurt you. I'd never hurt you.
Hey! Hey! Open the door! Open the door! Please!
Which shows that if the experiments weren't kept in containment, they would go on a rampage due to their mental irregulations and also extremely powerful new bodies. And although the experiments kept getting better and better, not all of them ended up working out, as experiment 1186, or Bobby Bear Hug, was having difficulties after her transfer. She showed lack of awareness, didn't respond to auditory stimuli, and couldn't even stand up. And although you may not notice it at first, Kissy also seems to have some problems with her being transferred that don't necessarily have to do with any physical or mental disabilities, but rather an emotional reaction so strong that it caused problems. After her experiments, she was eventually transferred to the shelf, where she would then write to the Playtime Co staff that she was feeling senses of impending doom. She was constantly anxious and not able to perform tasks as directed, leading to staff getting close to intervening. However, she eventually calmed down, and we do still see remnants of her nervousness to this day though. She acts really shy and constantly grabs onto the fur on her arms whenever she's anxious. But what's even crazier is that Playtime Co was able to do this on such large scales that we can't even count how many experiments there were in total. As in chapter 4, when we start heading towards the prison, we come across a giant cave filled with toy bodies piled in these giant hills, most likely meaning that there were probably thousands of them living in Playtime at one point, which might have been the reason why Playtime Co had two separate labs, as the secondary labs are the labs that we go through during the red smoke puzzle in chapter 4, while the main labs were the labs down in the bottom of the factory that we fell to at the very end of chapter 4. But even though they were able to do all of this, the one variable they couldn't account for was the prototype, who was able to convince all of the toys to overthrow the factory, leading to an end of Playtime Co.'s work. But what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and click on this video right here.